On behalf of Daya Reddy, ISC President, and Haida Hackman, ISC Chief Executive Officer, I'm delighted that we have been able to partner with SDN TReNDS on this webinar, Accounting for Everyone Using Gridded Population Data for Sustainable Development. For those of you who don't know the International Science Council, we are a non-governmental organisation with a global membership that brings together 40 international scientific unions and associations and over 140 national and regional scientific organisations, including academies and research councils. In fact, some of our union members include the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population, and CoData and World Data System are an affiliate programs of the ISC. You can see our work at council.science on the web, or you can follow us on Twitter using the handle @ISC. Now we haven't got much time, so I'd like to welcome Jessica Espy, who is Senior Advisor to the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network and the Director of TReNDS. Over to you, Jessica, to introduce the webinar.
This is ultimately about leaving no one behind. The phrase, which was also a major commitment of the Sustainable Development Goals. The aim being to ensure that even the poorest and the hardest to reach and the most vulnerable can benefit from the same opportunities as everyone else, and that we bring them with us and focus on them first in our efforts to achieve sustainable development. But of course, to do that, to ensure everyone is counted, population data is essential. So today we're talking about gridded or raster population data. And those are gridded population maps that represent the distribution of the population in rows and columns of grid cells. And they're typically defined by latitude or longitude coordinates. An increasing number of data providers are combining information from censuses with satellite-derived geospatial features to redistribute populations and produce gridded population datasets. The aim is to have better accuracy, predictability, and location data of our, relating to our population. And as Hayden and others will no doubt tell us in a minute, assuming poor Hayden has managed to sort out his audio, there's huge potential to use this kind of data to help track people's locations, services, support, and their well-being. But despite the progress we've made, there remains a lot of confusion or simply just a lack of awareness about gridded population data. And a large number of different data sets now available can be overwhelming to users, particularly to those who lack the time or expertise to understand their differences. So to that end, in 2018, a group called the PopGrid Data Collaborative was established, first set up by Seaton at Columbia University. And it's basically a consortium of different data users, providers, and stakeholders working with geo-referenced data on population, human settlements, and infrastructure. And what we are trying to do, SDSN TReNDS is one of the managers of that group, is we are trying to get all these communities to talk to one another, to share their methods, to share their approaches, and to work together to make this kind of data much more accessible to the general public. So that is obviously the focus of our discussion today, and in particular we'll be talking about a report that we've just released from the PopGrid Collaborative called Leaving No One Off the Map, which attempts to introduce these different methods and make them more accessible, and we're going to hear some insights from that report today. And I'm delighted to say that Hayden, who hopefully will be joining us, is one of the authors. I noticed we are also missing Victor, who is one of our panelists. He is on the line, but again, hasn't managed to unmute yet. So hopefully Victor and Hayden will be able to turn their cameras on soon and join us in due course. So the format of this event is a discussion. We're not going to do set pieces. I've got some key questions to fire to our different discussants. And then I really hope that we can go into a bit of a lively debate. For those of you joining us online, we encourage you to put your comments in the questions box and to do that throughout the discussion. Whenever anything pops up into your mind, please pop a question into the question box. It should be coming up on your control panel as a little grey icon with an arrow. If you click on it, there'll be a box where you can type your question. And then I will see it, the panelists will see it, and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as we possibly can. Great, okay. So we're gonna kick off. On the panel today, we have 4 wonderful world-leading experts on different aspects of data science, data technologies, and different methodological approaches. We have Susanna, who hopefully you can all see on your screen. Susanna, give us a wave. There we go. Susanna Adamo is a research scientist at the Center for International Earth Science Information Network at Columbia University, more informally known as CESN. And she's the lead project scientist of NASA's Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, CDAC. She's also coordinator of the Population and Environment Research Network, or PERN. We also have on the line, and hopefully we'll see him shortly, Victor. Victor Ohorogo is currently Senior Africa Regional Manager for the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, which is based at the UN Foundation. He provides guidance on how the GPSDD can bring partners together to strengthen data ecosystems and how different data sources can be accessed and used to achieve sustainable development more broadly. Also on visible by your cameras is Lisa Basales. Lisa, give us a wave. Thank you. Lisa is a professor of statistics at the University of the Philippines, and she was the first national statistician of the Philippines from 2014 to 2019, heading the Philippine Statistics Authority. I'm also very excited to say that she's a member of SDSN TReNDS, so I get to work with her regularly, as well as many other boards and groups, and is on the editorial team of the Statistical Journal of the International Association of Official Statistics. So she is a real one-stop shop of information. Then we also have Hayden Dahm, as I've mentioned. Hayden is an analyst with TReNDS, our group, and his work spans data standards, data partnerships, and different types of innovations. He's also one of the authors of the report, Leaving No One Off the Map, which I just mentioned. So I'm going to kick off the questions. Before I do, I want to check, Hayden, can you hear me, and are you able to reply? Give it a sec. Nope. Okay, that's unfortunate. Hopefully colleagues at ISC can keep working with him to see if we can fix that, or he can dial in by other means. Victor, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank goodness for that.
Awesome.
Hi, Victor.
Yeah, hi. Good to meet you, Lisa, Susan, Jessica, and everyone. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry it's been battling to turn on my video, but that's been very difficult for me.
Don't worry, Victor. As long as we can hear your lovely voice, we will cope.
Thank you so much.
And hopefully Hayden will likewise be able to jump in. Hayden, at any point, if the sound gets sorted, please do just jump in and let us know you're there. Okay, great. So we're going to jump right in. And Victor, I'm afraid I'm going to put you on the spot straight away and just ask, how do you think georeferenced data, particularly gridded population data, can really contribute to supporting the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. Well, I do work a lot with the national statistical offices across a number of countries in the African region, and not many of them, but for the few of them that I have had interactions with in terms of how they're engaging with and using gridded population data, I'm beginning to see that it's really helping a couple of those, NSOs and governments in some of these countries to have access to better disaggregated data. That's the way they seem to say it's better disaggregated data, which is helping them to understand where the most vulnerable people are located. And this is really helping them to have specific, well-targeted policy and program interventions that are aligned with the SDGs. For instance, in Ghana, the food there's a policy on planting for food and jobs in Ghana, which really was developed based on gridded population data that was collected on farmers and farming communities across the country, and that helped governments, to put together that policy on food, planting for food and jobs. And we've seen also in Senegal, they did some work around deforestation impact in Senegal, and of course we're having conversations with Ghana's Statistical Office with issues regarding child disability, and trying to understand where these children who are in primary schools across the country that are disabled. That's been a big challenge for government. And so using the gridded population data approach, it's helping to understand where are these most vulnerable segments of the population located, and then we can have more targeted approach in terms of policy and program intervention to address the case and the issues that has to do with those population segments. And increasingly, we're also seeing governments using, gridded population data to better understand who is being left behind and what factors are causing their exclusion, really, environmental, etc. And that's of course providing the statistical offices the needed evidences that is required to engage policymakers and government at the highest level. And that's what I've seen in many of the countries that I'm currently engaging with in the African region.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Victor. That's lots of excellent examples. Assuming that Paul Hayden has still not managed to sort out his audio, I'm going to actually throw a question I originally had in mind to Hayden, to you, Lisa, if that's okay. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'd love to just have your reflections on how gridded population data is being used or has been used to respond to disasters, and particularly COVID. Have you seen different governments or different groups using gridded population data as they're thinking about responding to health crises like coronavirus?
Thank you very much, Jessica. First of all, I'm coming into this discussion in this promotion of the use of a whole data ecosystem to address all the needed data for different interventions. And for COVID-19, unfortunately, here in the Philippines, I don't see it. In Southeast Asia as well, I don't see yet how gridded population data are being used in connection with COVID-19. Of course, reports are by geographic areas, by location. But as to presenting COVID-19 data vis-a-vis gridded population, I don't see it yet in this part of the world where I am. May I add, though, that in the statistical offices for population data, the gridded population is now already being considered. So like Indonesia, for example, that is really one of the countries which have been using big data, satellite imagery, mobile data. I see that Indonesia has been doing this gridded population products. In the Philippines, we actually already have gridded population areas in preparation for the census for 2020, where the different enumeration areas already have the XY geopoints, longitude, latitude, in preparation for producing gridded population after the census has been done in between census years. In disaster management, very, very specific to small areas, gridded population has been used actually in the Philippines. For example, when we had Typhoon Haiyan, which was really devastating, our Office of Civil Defense actually used a gridded population to some extent.
Okay.
But
oh wow,
these
that's
are
something to me in Korean.
Where decisions had to be made on the fly. So I think I'll stop there because I'm very happy to hear the voice of Hayden. Thank you very much, Jessica.
Sorry, Lisa, and thank you. No, and that was great. Hayden, we can now hear you, which is
I'm
fabulous.
so sorry for interrupting you, Lisa. Can you see me as well?
No, but we can hear you loud and clear, which is wonderful.
Okay, I realize seeing and hearing me is just a bit too much to ask for, I guess. Wait, let me see if I can click something. I don't know what was going wrong. Wait, let me see.
Don't worry, don't worry. So we're going to,
can you see
Hayden,
me?
we're going to continue. No, we can't, but don't worry. We're going to continue with the webinar. We'll just do audio.
Okay,
Lisa, thank you for this. That's all right. Thank you for this great remarks. Did you want to finish any other comments about the the way in which you responded to the typhoon? No? Okay. Hayden, all right, now that you've managed to join us, I'm going to make you jump straight in. And I'd love you to tell us a little bit about some of the ways you've seen gridded population data being used, very practically and specifically with response to disaster risks and responses. Lisa just highlighted the great example of that it was used to some degree when they were mapping impacts of the typhoon in the Philippines. But are there other examples that spring to mind for you that you think are really compelling example of why gridded population data can be such a useful tool?
Sure, fabulous. And I guess I'd say the theme of this is leaving no one off the screen. So certainly gridded population data can be an excellent asset when responding to an emergency situation where we have to understand in a very short period of time what populations are being impacted, how those people are distributed, and who in particular is most vulnerable. This is something that gridded population is uniquely able to help us with. And I think a fantastic example, it sounds like this is rather related to what Lisa just highlighted, is how the World Food Program uses gridded population data in responding to various natural disasters. They can receive in real time maps of the impact zones for earthquakes, the trajectories of tropical storms, and overlay those maps with gridded population data to estimate with just a click of a button, basically, how many people are impacted, where they'll be located, and accordingly, what level of resources need to be mobilized. And they can then share their dashboards with various partners. And while the estimates might not exactly match the figures on the ground, it provides them with a working understanding that allows them to initiate the operations more or less immediately rather than having to figure out through some laborious process what needs to be done. In terms of responding to disease outbreaks, grid population also has an important role to play, especially as we're seeing with COVID, how populations are distributed and what their various demographic characteristics are is extremely critical to how disease might spread. And we're seeing, as part of the COVID response, different members of the PopGrid Collaborative are advising epidemiologists and policymakers in Asia and Africa and Europe and the Americas as well, I believe. The JRC, part of the European Council, which produces gridded population data, has actually produced a helpful tool. It's a risk map that looks at how different populations around the world might be susceptible to the coronavirus. And so this is something that could help us in guiding resource allocation. Likewise, Season at Columbia, producers of gridded population of the world, have created a tool that allows you to view different gridded population data sets in combination with data about COVID cases and deaths. And you can then draw on this map, create any shape of your choosing, and see for yourself how the population and COVID overlaps in your target area.
Thanks, Hayden. That seems like a
this information readily available to the whole wide variety of people, and we are already seeing in. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I think we had some interference there. But Hayden, I was just saying that seems like a very good and natural moment to jump to Susanna, if you don't mind. So sorry to cut you off. But I wanted to turn to Susanna now to discuss a little bit. You mentioned that Season was finding ways of visualizing population data and overlaying COVID information and so on. And that's brilliant, but it does raise questions for me. If Season's doing one thing and World Pop are doing another thing, and there's lots of different groups producing different types of gridded population data, are there big discrepancies? Are there big differences? And does it matter which one you use, which source you use? So I'd love to turn to Susanna now to just explain to us a little bit some of the key differences between the data sets, particularly those that were highlighted in the report, leaving no one off the map, and can tell us a bit about how she understands those differences to impact how they can be used. Thanks, Susanna.
Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. Okay, so this is the PopGrid Viewer, and it's part of the PopGrid website. So we are looking at the comparison part of the tool. So the little form that you have, this polygon, is the area where the Oaxaca earthquake happened yesterday. So before I start to answer the question, let me just mention that the largest differences between the different data sets that are included, for example, in PopGrid, are related to what are the input data, what are the adjustment factors that you use to make things comparable, and what is the modeling, particularly the modeling approach that is being used. So this is an example of how the different data sets included in PopGrid count the population for the area in the polygon. So let's say that we are comparing now the gridded population of the world, that is the dark gray bar, and the ESRI world population estimates, that is the green bar. So in the case of the gridded population of the world, census data and the from national statistical offices and the administrative boundaries that goes within are the key inputs for GPW. In the case of WPE, they also use census data, but also population estimates for other sources, and also use other geospatial correlates and satellite imaginary. The other large difference between these two data sets is in terms of modeling approach, because GPW applies areal weighting, and in this method, the population of the census reporting unit are distributed homogeneously across the surface, the area, by the number of grid cells that are included in that particular area. But the WPE use asymmetric mapping, that is a different approach. And in this method, the population count is allocated to cells where people are more likely to be or to live, relying in the additional variables that are part of the input data. So so those are some of the differences for these two data sets.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Susanna. That's really helpful and useful, I think, to see it visualized as well. And what do you see as, does that mean, in your opinion, each of the different data sets have different specific uses? Are there different, could you give some examples of where one might use world pop data versus gridded population of the world?
Yes. So, for example, the gridded population of the world is, as Hayden mentioned, is used in the COVID-19 viewer. So that's part of how it is used, and it's also used as an input for models where you cannot include population surfaces that are heavily modeled, because then you have a problem of endogeneity. So you are using a population surface that is modeled by the same variable that you're trying to predict. So it's a problem there. So that's a very basic, but it's also used in terms of policy, and is used as for the finding denominators. And the similarity for the WPE, they're also used for modeling, for economic, because they are heavily relying on where people live and what are some of the barriers for people to move from one place to another, and that goes into how consumption is organized, for example. So these are just very basic uses. In general, population grid, as already mentioned Victor, already mentioned Hayden, are used for a number of very different uses: disasters, policy, a lot of health related elements, particularly world pop, as for planning the household surveys when you don't have a reliable census data, and so on.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Susanna. And you finished on a good note there, talking about the census. I'd like to just turn to Lisa now again and ask, Lisa, what is the value added of this if you have a census, right? How does this complement or can support the census, or is this a replacement for the census? I'd love to know just your reflections on kind of the benefits and the limitations of these methods vis-a-vis a traditional census.
Thank you very much, Jess. Actually, you know, I go back to what I said earlier, where I would like to place gridded population data in this whole data ecosystem within countries. So in my mind, the use of gridded population will actually differ from country to country. If I may share with you, in the Philippines, we have actually a very strong statistics law with great support from our policymakers and even our lawmakers that craft the budgets. So in my experience, the lawmakers and policymakers in the Philippines have acknowledged the need for providing for funds to do the censuses every 10 years. In fact, we do also a mid-decade census, which is not a census of population and housing, but it's really a census of population only, just to update the population counts. Now, so in my mind, there are countries where we really have to push for gridded population in the sense that they don't have the funds and they don't have the regularity of their censuses. There are countries, maybe like in the Philippines, where we actually have very clear schedules of censuses. But we need also gridded population because we don't have we need estimates, good estimates of census years. So for me, one very important role of gridded population is really not to replace censuses, because actually gridded population need census data as well as other data to be able to, you know, do all of the methodologies. So population projections. This is in my mind where gridded population should really be the way to go for the Philippines to enhance the population projections that we have in between census years. But now I'm thinking with the COVID-19 impact on economies, businesses are not working, no taxes coming to the government. So I don't know, funding for censuses may be an issue. And so this is where, again, gridded population is very important as part of the discussion of the data ecosystems. In my mind, it's not, gridded population is not to replace censuses, but actually to help countries cope with certain issues of delayed data collection and or some pockets of no data. Again, going back to the data ecosystem, bringing in different modes, different sources of information. Actually, I requested some colleagues from the Philippines to join us in this webinar, because this is really what I want to push for, to use gridded population for population projections for the Philippines. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to colleagues from the Philippines. And also I want to say a thank you to someone who has shared in the chat an example of some gridded population data analysis looking at the impact of COVID within the city of Ahmedabad in India. So thank you so much. That looks really interesting, and I encourage people to take a look. Great. We are going to jump on. Victor, I want to turn to you for a minute and ask you, you work with a lot of national statistical offices across Africa, as I understand it, on a range of different topics. Can you speak to how familiar are actors in the national statistical offices that you've engaged with about gridded population data? And what are some examples of them using it in practice?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Well, I would say, obviously, there are several of the national statistical offices that I would consider late adopters. They are pretty far behind in engaging and using gridded population data. Of course, you know that most of the statistical offices oftentimes have very strong traditional approaches, so to speak, to use of data, and particularly new data sources. So we have, in my interactions, in a lot of them are not using gridded population data. But I would also say that there is a growing familiarity and interest by several statistical offices, in using gridded population data. And I think that the whole issue of COVID-19 has made that demand actually grew. And I can speak to a few of the examples of the work that we're currently doing when the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, did join forces with the GPSDD to launch an initiative to support countries in the African continent to respond to COVID-19. And so we, on our own parts, aggregated a number of our partner suppliers together. And among them, of course, and chief among them was Grid 3. And what Grid 3 is actually doing with several countries right now, about 21 countries in Africa. We have actually engaged with 45 countries in Africa in the last 3 months. We have work speedily ongoing in 21 of those countries. Grid 3 is doing massive work with us in about 16 of the countries, helping them to develop spatial dashboards that brings into it graded population data layered with COVID-19 cases, poverty indicators, vulnerability maps, points of interest, isolation centers, and etc. to help governments, national statistical offices, ministries of health, the national task forces on COVID-19 to enable them take quick decision in terms of where is the population, where are those who are affected and most affected or most vulnerable to the infection, where are the health facilities located, the test centers, and etc., so they can direct people to those locations. How do we track the virus as it's weaved its way through the different our population? If you look at squatter communities, it's so difficult to lock down, and so you want to understand and do some modeling in terms of how the virus could be spreading in those places. And how do you use such graded population data layered with certain other data to do socioeconomic impact analysis and modeling to be able to inform governments on what is required to be done in supporting the population during and post-COVID. And so that's one critical example we've seen. And a lot of the national statistical offices are beginning to rise up to that challenge and seeing and making demands for graded population data. In Ghana and Rwanda, we've seen them use graded population data, particularly to produce poverty maps, using spatially disaggregated population layers. And this is leading to the increasing socioeconomic interventions we're seeing in the northern part of Ghana, where there seems to be a huge prevalence of poverty as compared to the other parts of the country. A lot of the standard household surveys, the MICs, the DHSs, the labor force statistics that are being collected are now being done with specific location data by most of these statistical offices. Again, I would say with respect to Ghana, Rwanda, because these are quite interested in using new trends and methodologies in technologies for data collection and data analysis and use. And we have seen also where the excellent work that Grid 3 has done in Nigeria is helping to use graded population to fight polio eradication in the northern parts of Nigeria. Great work that Grid 3 is doing there. Ghana has used graded population data to do small area estimations from the 2017 MIC survey, and they embedded that work into their COVID-19 dashboard, which is allowing them to view at the district level, understanding prevalence of hand washing behaviors and several other vulnerability indicators that could predispose people to COVID-19. And finally, Grid 3 is also assisting the Ghana Statistical Service with graded population for the enumeration areas. Ghana Statistical Services is preparing to have its 2020 census, and that whole approach will help them to improve data collection logistics and of course data quality. And this is these are some of the use cases and some of the nice cases we're beginning to see. And for us at GPSDD, we're keen to seeing how we can showcase some of these unique examples to several other statistical offices in the region to motivate them to get into the game of using graded population data. Thank you.
Brilliant. Wow, Victor, so many good examples. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's always really nice to sort of hear about how it's being applied to bring it all to life. Hayden, I want to come back to you. So recently you lead authored this report, Leaving No One Off the Map, which hopefully everyone has now seen. You can find it at SDSN TReNDS.org or on the PopGrid website, which is popgrid.org. So this report, as I understand it, was really trying to communicate, make a lot more of these data sets accessible and help people decipher what they should use for what purpose. So could you maybe just give us a little bit of an overview of what some of the key considerations are for researchers or policymakers when they're trying to select the appropriate gridded population data set? What do they need to think about when they're choosing which one to use?
Absolutely. Just to confirm, you're still able to hear me?
Yes, we are. Perfect. Go ahead.
Fabulous. So if you're looking to use gridded population data, there are a few considerations you should keep in mind. And the best thing to do would be to first familiarize yourself with the different features of the available data sets. And this is something that we outline for folks in chapter 2 of our report. In particular, it's good to understand what data is going into the population estimates, not just census data, but satellite imagery and other things of that sort. Also, how is the estimation being adjusted to reflect the population in your particular year of interest? What are some of the assumptions that are underlying the model itself? And finally, what are the different output characteristics of the estimation and the data that you're able to access? And it's good to then identify the different attributes of your own needs and your projected use case and how these align with what is currently available. And this can inform your decision a number of ways. For example, if you are interested in population during the daytime, let's say an economic activity at lunchtime somewhere, most of the gridded population data sets only provide nighttime or residential population. So in this case, you might be interested in using Landscan, which provides a 24-hour population estimate. Additionally, you should think critically about what level of resolution you actually need in your population estimations. The high resolution products can be incredibly valuable, but at the same time, of course, as you zoom in, the risk of errors does increase. If you genuinely do need high resolution, something like GHSL available at 3 arcseconds can be a very good tool to consider. But if you're looking at something that doesn't require high resolution, say climate change at a continental level, GPW might be perfectly adequate. Another really important thing to keep in mind is whether or not the topic you're actually studying is a covariate for the particular population estimate. WorldPop, WPE, Landscan all use roadways as one of their covariates. And so if you're using that product to study roadways, you should be aware that there might be a bias since the estimates were generated based off of existing assumptions about how populations might congregate near roadways. So these are just a few things to keep in mind. In chapter 4, we explore these and some other rules of thumb. There isn't necessarily a particular answer for what's best, but if you explore the data sets a little bit, you can hopefully have an informed use of the available products.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Hayden. That was very clear, and I think shows they all have their different values and sort of merits at different levels and scales. So it's just a question of knowing how to decipher them essentially and choose between the options. And for those of you who've not really played around with this data before, I'd really encourage you to go to popgrid.org, which Susanna briefly showed earlier, and go to the PopGrid Viewer, which actually lets you overlay lots of the data sets and look at the boundary differentials and so on and better understand their differences. So it's a very useful tool. We're going to go to an open discussion any minute now because we are really running tight on time. But before we do that, a final question for Susanna. Susanna, I just want to ask, what are researchers like yourself working on to improve gridded population data? What's the kind of next big ambition about how we make this better and more useful?
Oh, there's a lot going on. There's a lot, and you mentioned there is some of that in the report, but also a lot going on. I want to go into something that Lisa said about the 2020 random censuses, because the COVID epidemic happened in the year where most of the countries have their censuses. So, for example, at CDAC, we are working on the next iteration of the gridded population of the world, and we rely heavily on the census data. So we already start collecting, but now we are thinking about how exactly we're going to move if we start having this issue, how long this could go, and so on. So this is one of the issues, because this is a moment where it's a lot of work because of the census happening in many, many countries. But the other is that we want, as a community, to add more variables, so to grid more variables. So in addition to have the population counts, there is some of the products already have the age and sex structure included in the previous round. So now we want to include more variables, and that's a determination you need to do because it has to be comparable and it has to be actually useful. So one of the things that at least I am thinking, and we are thinking, is in terms of households and in terms of dwellings, because those are also very common products in censuses. And this is a particular opinion. I think that gives you a way of connecting settlement from imagery with census data. So just something to think about. But that's one way of thinking about that. There is a lot of discussion or work going on in terms of how to improve the measurement of precision, accuracy, and certainty. So there's a lot of work on that, and that's related with something that Hayden said about how you select the resolution, how you select the products. You can have very high resolution, but you can have a lot more uncertainty. So that's something that the community is concerned and working about. Also about using all what is known about gridded population in order to do projections, and also how to add, for example, environmental variables to those projections without, so thinking about alternative scenarios with without those particular projections. And also, and I'm glad Hayden already mentioned grid 3, working more with the National Statistical Offices and other stakeholders. So now, not only what we as producers can offer, but also what are the demands about what are the needs of that.
So on that, thank you, Susanna. On the question of the needs and demands, I think Lisa has one more example that you wanted to give to us about, how this is being used and applied, and then we're going to just address a few of the questions from the chat. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Jess. I go back really to a use case in my part of the world where we have a lot of disasters, storms, earthquakes, volcano eruptions. And so for me, a gridded population is really where we need its use. Example, I go back to Typhoon Haiyan. Decisions had to be made on the fly by policymakers and decision makers, and where the population went after the tsunami came. And of course, we had the census data, but immediately after the storm, people didn't know where the population went. So this is really where, in my mind, the researchers like Susanna could help countries all over the world to refine their methodology. And when Susanna mentioned they need more data, more variables, more covariates, this is really where I'm really pushing for more discussion of data ecosystem, enhancing administrative data, which could be down to really the village level, and looking at how these different sources of information can help researchers like SDSN, TReNDS, GPSDT to refine really their methodologies. One example also for the Philippines in the census is conflict areas. So even if we have very good enumerators for the census, we cannot send them to conflict areas for their safety. So this is another area where gridded population would really be most helpful as an augmentation to the census that we do. Actually, another group of population, Jess, are the exclusive subdivisions. It's very difficult to penetrate them. in my mind, this is another use case. Thank you for giving me time to share.
No, don't worry, don't worry. And actually, Lisa, I think you might have triggered a question amongst one of our participants, because Bawana just messaged and asked a question which seems very relevant, which is, what about dynamic movement? So like migrants, refugees, is that captured by gridded population? Susanna, do you want to respond on that?
Sure, I can try. So I want to mention that near real-time population mapping is another area of research, and that is going to how you deal with mobility. And that means that you need you need to start incorporating other data sources. And the research that has been done is related to social data, cell phone data. And you can use that as an input and map. For example, I have seen examples of how you can look at changing densities over day between, for example, a train station and outside the train station. So that's something that the community has been exploring and working actually a lot. And there's example for several different countries. One issue there is that the cell phone data is proprietary. So that's another completely different part of the discussion. But there are work on that. And usually when you want to know daily movement, that's the kind of data you may need to use. Or you can use very high resolution data that has that is several times a day. I'm not really sure how that, or both combined. So but another is if you are looking at more days, the International Organization for Migration has been working with displacement matrices, for example. Those are not like moment by moment, but that's something that could also give you a granularity in time that is different from what you get from the censuses. Of course, in the case the IOM were working with conflict situation, you have another considerations in that particular case. So those are the ones that put my mind at this point. But mobility, migration, we all know, I mean, I am a demographer, is quite difficult to pinpoint in time and space, of course.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Susanna. So one question that's come in from the audience, which I think is a big one, is, what does this mean about privacy? Does this kind of fine resolution, gridded data allow the government to track your every move? Asks one participant. Hayden, do you want to respond on this?
Sure, absolutely. And I realize that this is certainly a point of concern, especially right now as new forms of data are being accessed. But gridded population data, oh, sorry, that is my dog coughing in the background. Gridded population data only provides figures at an aggregate level. At the highest resolution, we're looking at figures given at 100 meters by 100 meters. Many of the products only give data at kilometer by kilometer level. So it's actually quite similar to some of the data that would be available through higher resolution censuses in some countries. It's looking really at the community level rather than any sort of individual level.
Great, and I think that's an important point, right? Because with more and more data available, with more big data technologies, the sensors, with the use of phones, I think it's right for people to be asking questions about, when you overlay all this information, are we essentially empowering the government with too much personal data? But in gridded population, in this case, that's not the kind of level we're talking about. So it's more of a helpful planning tool than it is anything else. Great, lots of other questions coming in. One very quick question for you, Lisa, is about the accessibility of these different data sets. Can you access the gridded population data that the Philippines government has developed, or is it all treated as private?
Aggregate data are available, but of course, individual level data are not accessible. Although we have anonymized population data, anonymized household data, we never release establishment data because they can never be anonymized. So it's really a matter of the modeling that you do for the gridded population. What unit of modeling will be done so that what data will be accessed. But as Hayden said, these use aggregated data.
Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Well, then related to that, a great question has come in about, as you've all said, population data is very much a complement to census data and relies quite heavily on census data, right, in order to develop gridded data sets. So in areas where censuses are not able to be completed frequently or are very outdated, so take, for example, Afghanistan, which had its last partial survey in the 1970s, can we use gridded population data? And is there a bias towards more high-income countries because, they've got better censuses, so therefore a better quality of output? That's a question from Alexandra. Hayden, do you want to reply on that?
Sure, absolutely. This is certainly something to be kept in mind. For example, in the United States, we have census data available at the census tract level, whereas in Russia, I think for some of the gridded products, the best census data we have as input is at the provincial level. So there's a huge variation in the quality of data that's underlying these estimations. And in countries where recent census data is not available, this can definitely be a limitation. But I think it's important to point out that we're doing the best we can with the data that is available. This perhaps points to the need for investment into the statistical systems more generally of countries where that might be lacking.
Brilliant, thank you, Hayden. That's very helpful. We're getting lots of great technical questions coming in at the moment, which is fabulous. Thank you. Keep them coming thick and fast. If we don't get to all of them in the next 5 minutes, then you can find contact information for some of the members of this group on the PopGrid website, so popgrid.org, or SDSN TReNDS.org, and that way you can get hold of almost all of us, or we can connect you to the right people. One question that's been asked, which is very interesting, is what is the geographical scale that you recommend for good estimation of population data? Is there a particular scale that's most appropriate when you're trying to look at population, where populations live and where they're moving, or can you use any of these products? I'm going to fire that to Susanna.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I have a great answer. The issue of scale, for example, if you are trying to track movement, the issue of scale is going to tell you how much movement you have, because movement usually means you want to track that and you need to cross certain border, or you have to travel certain distances. So that's an issue depending what you want to do. You want to do intra-urban, you want to do between cities, between urban and rural. All those are questions that, as a user or researcher, you need to ask yourself to define your needs and then go, and as Hayden said, know the data set and see what you actually need. So there's a number, like thinking WordPop or GRC, GSEL, they're great for urban areas, and then you have the higher resolution settlement layer that has an advantage for rural areas. If you want to track movement, you need to decide what exactly is the level of movement that you want to track, how often, and so on. And the same with any other question. You're working at the continental scale, and if you are you're looking at certain question, you want to use certain type of resolution. You have 1 kilometer, you can have 5 kilometers, you can have 100 meters, as Hayden said. But also you need to know in that case, what are the underlying actual census data? As also Hayden said, US has blocks. In other cases, you have district. If you are having in other cases, you have level 1 or state. So the issues scale is a huge one, but there's no the one-fit-all question. You really need to know and interrogate and demand what you need if it's not out there.
Thank you so much. I am very cognizant of time. We only have a few minutes left. So I'm going to finish with a question for all of you, and I want to start with Victor. Victor, what do you think the scientific community, all these actors we've been talking about, producing these brilliant gridded population data sets, what do you think they could do, or we as a community could do, to try and make these things much more accessible? for countries and for national statistical offices? Are there things that you think would really help to encourage uptake of these methods?
Well, two things I'm saying across most of these countries. One is that there's got to be effective engagement with the scientific, community, researchers, policymakers, and one of the things that we're trying to do is that in each of the countries where we're supporting our governments, we have strengthened or created data communities, and we have advocated strongly that researchers and policymakers be included in those data communities, so that the participation from researchers, they could have policy roundtables or dialogues where this type of data is presented to these researchers and policymakers. And that's helping things a lot. For instance, the work we are doing in Tanzania, where our lead, our focal point is currently and constantly using graded population data to engage the VP's office, the Vice President's office, and the Minister in charge of the environment, in looking at the impact that, the impact on the environment, and of course, understanding who lives in, those spaces, and how is deforestation, the drying up of Lake Sulunga, so to speak, will be impacting on the livelihoods, of those people within those locations. Then the second thing is when we're hearing this loud and clear, that we need more user-friendly platforms that enable, scientists, researchers, policymakers to, interact with this, data sets, on those dashboards, that then provides them ready, products and analytics or analytical tools that enables them to do whatever else they want to do, reuse that data and what have you. So those user-friendly platforms, and then effective, frontal engagements with, our scientists and researchers and policymakers. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Victor. Lisa, what's your number one recommendation to try and encourage colleagues in the Philippines to use more of this? What do you think would be most helpful?
Use cases. It should be problem-based, meaning show a problem that everybody wants to have answers on, and work on that and make that really successful. So in the Philippines, for example, our lawmakers really want to know the poverty situation of their particular districts. So we can work on graded population showing poverty there, but also make academia part of the discussion. So this is really where, as Oliver said, data communities need to talk to each other, but use cases, work on specific problems, show that graded population can answer them. Thank you.
Good work. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Lisa. That's great. Susanna, I want to come to you. I'm going to give Hayden the final word, given he joined us late. Susanna, is there anything you think, particularly the PopGrid consortium, of which you're a member, could do usefully to try and further improve accessibility, or any other outputs or research? What should be next on our agenda?
I think that some of the things that are already mentioned by Lisa and Victor about awareness, about making the data important. I mean, why exactly that someone is going to use this? So make it the use cases to demonstrate that the data is useful for many different uses, and keep working on the validation and the comparison. So to be even more clear about how the data can be used for many different situations, and make a very clear validation about what the strengths are at the constraint could be, and how they can be used in comparison, or they can be used one instead of another. So make those, it's already a lot of work on that. Keep working on that, on the validation work, accuracy. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Hayden, the final word to you. You've been knee-deep in thinking about the sort of merits, demerits, accessibility of these methods for a while now. What's the number one thing you think we need to do to make them all more accessible? And is there a particular role you can envisage for groups like the ISC or SDSN TReNDS or PopGrid?
Sure. Well, riffing off of what Susanna just said, something that the PopGrid group has identified as a really big priority is conducting systematic assessments for validating these different data products and trying to quantify some of the uncertainties involved so that we can actually understand in a more definitive way how these different products compare with the real populations on the ground. And this is really critical for improving their usability so that users can feel confident in actually applying the products, that they can assess how the different products might perform in their particular regions. And so undertaking this work is a really important next step. And this is something that the wider scientific community could really help us with in terms of accessing different types of data that could be pulled into such a validation study. We have work for individual geographic regions for a few different data products, but we don't have that systematic consideration just yet.
Great, thank you so much, Hayden. That's a great call for further research and action. All that remains is for me to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists, particularly Lisa, who's joining very late in the evening, and to Victor, Hayden, and Susanna as well, to all of you for your insightful remarks. Thank you so much to the colleagues from ISC for hosting this, for sharing it with your networks. Just a reminder, for those of you who we asked a question and we didn't get to it, my colleague Alison has put an email address in the chat box. Do please feel free to email us. We're happy to be in touch, as well as various other resources like the Open Data Inventory, which can help you understand where you can access open data from national governments on different population issues. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a very good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.